Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend some time with Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. This book was originally published back in 1951 in France, and it was translated in a collaboration between the author and Grace Frick. So, Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. I wanted to read this because it's Hadrian was a Roman emperor, so I love ancient history and Roman history. But this really intrigued me. This is historical fiction, so it's a fictionalized letter written by Hadrian, sort of an autobiographical letter written by Hadrian to his adopted grandson, Marcus Aurelius. So this sort of fictionalized historical fiction look at Hadrian and his life really intrigued me. It sort of got a Meditations vibe, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So Hadrian's reflecting a lot on his life, the things he's done as emperor, the relationships he's had, and then just about different things like philosophy and civilization, and really just what it has meant to be alive. As the letter opens, he's actually about 60 or so, and his health is failing. I thought I'd kick it off with this quote from the book that explains really why he's decided to write a letter. It sounds like he's writing this letter to Marcus Aurelius, and he says, "Little by little, this letter, begun in order to tell you of the progress of my illness, has become the diversion of a man who no longer has the energy required for continued application to affairs of state. It has become, in fact, the written meditation of a sick man who holds audience with his memories." So that's really the gist of what this book is about. It's just a sort of a meditative look back on Hadrian's life. So just to get an idea of where we're talking about in history, Hadrian, this is Hadrian, and Hadrian, his years of life were from 76 to 138, and he was the Roman emperor. He was the emperor of Rome from 117 to his death in 138. So I thought how I would approach this chat is just talk a bit about just the different aspects of the book that sort of stood out as being really interesting. This is a fictional look at his life, so it's not a biography necessarily, although at the end of the book there's actually bibliographical notes by the author where she really describes some of the rationale that she took for different aspects of the sort of thoughts and feelings as ascribed to Hadrian here in this book. So Hadrian, the book, he talks about it really kind of opens. He was from Spain, what is currently Spain, a place called Italica in modern day Spain. He was Trajan, the Emperor Trajan's cousin, and he ended up marrying Trajan's grandniece, I believe it was. So he had relationship with Trajan, but he was an adult and actually was not adopted by Trajan to be his successor until Trajan was actually on his deathbed in a letter that was signed by Trajan's wife, Plotina. So Plotina turned out to be, as described in the book, Hadrian is basically his best friend throughout life. He had two really key relationships in his life. One is Plotina, and the other one is Antinous. So we'll talk about Antinous more a little bit later, but there's a quote here about Plotina that I thought I would just read because it just describes her sort of her friendship with Hadrian. The quote says, "Friendship was a choice to which she devoted her whole being. She gave herself to it utterly, and as I have done only to my loves. She has known me better than anyone has. I have let her see what I carefully concealed from everyone else. For example, my secret lapses into cowardice. So he was very close with Plotina, and he felt like he could be himself around her. And then, his other sort of love of his life was Antinous, was his companion, his lover, and Antinous was a much younger man. This is Marbles of Hadrian and Antinous, but Antinous was much younger and died actually either by an accident or by suicide right before he turned 20. Hadrian by this time was a middle-aged man. Antinous, whenever he died, the book sort of describes his death more as a suicide. They were in Egypt, and Antinous was drowned in sort of under mysterious circumstances. Well, Hadrian, as described in the book, goes into this grief that he never really got over. He established a cult of worship of Antinous throughout the Roman Empire, establishing temples and things to Antinous, and even established a city called Antinopolis in Egypt. And so he never stopped revering the memory of Antinous. So that was one of definitely the primary love relationship of his life, Plotina being his primary friend. So just some other things. Hadrian traveled extensively. So through this book, we see a lot of the Roman Empire because he travels over the course of really the entire Roman Empire. He was a great builder. So building temples and cities. He had this love of building. He's known, there's a couple of his structures still in existence today. Hadrian's Wall in the north of England, that was the border of that Britannia province of Rome at the time, is still there. And then he was also responsible for rebuilding the Parthenon in Rome, which is also still there. So he loved building. He loved Greece, the culture of Greece. He felt that Greece was an asset to humanity, and that it was part of Rome's responsibility to keep the peace for Greece so that they could continue their philosophical work and their sort of work that the Greeks have done in the sort of the evolution of civilization in his view. There's a quote here about that as well that I thought was really sort of telling about his views of Greece. The quote is, "I accepted without irritation the slightly haughty condescension of that proud race. According to an entire nation, the privileges which I have always so readily conceded to those I loved. But to give the Greeks time to continue and perfect their work, some centuries of peace were needed, with those calm leisures and discreet liberties which peace allows. Greece was depending upon us to be her protector, since after all we say that we are her master. I promised myself to stand watch over the defenseless god." So he sees Greece as this vulnerable culture, but yet a very sort of vital culture to civilization, and it is part of his job as the Emperor of Rome to ensure a peace so that work can continue. I thought that was pretty cool. His health starts to fail him. He's still in mourning over Antinous, never quite gotten over that. He's not real sure who to adopt. He has no children of his own. And he thinks this is actually the best way to actually pick a successor anyway, rather than a blood descendant, to actually pick who he feels would be the best person to be his successor. He ends up choosing, he chose one person that ended up dying before he could take office, so he ended up choosing another man who was 51 years old, Antoninus Pius. And then on the condition, though, that Antoninus Pius adopt Marcus Aurelius as his son to succeed him. So Marcus Aurelius then becomes Hadrian's adopted grandson. There's some other quotes that I just thought I would touch on that I just thought were real cool before I run out of time. One is about eating. So like I said, this letter is like meditations. It's meditations on life, and part of that is eating. And the quote is, "To eat a fruit is to welcome it into oneself a fair living object, which is alien to us, but is nourished and protected like us by the earth. It is to consume a sacrifice wherein we sustain ourselves at the expense of things. I have never bitten into a chunk of army bread without marveling that this coarse and heavy concoction can transform itself into blood and warmth and perhaps also courage. I just think that's so cool. Then he talks about sleeping, another quote about sleeping. But what interests me here, he says, is the specific mystery of sleep partaking of for itself alone. The inevitable plunge risked each night by the naked man, solitary and unarmed, into an ocean where everything changes, the colors, the densities, and even the rhythm of breathing, and where we meet the dead. What reassures us about sleep is that we do come out of it, and come out of it unchanged, since some mysterious band keeps us from bringing back with us in their true form even the remnants of our dreams. So cool. So he also talks about a lot about, government. What is good government? What is the purpose of government, and what constitutes it to be good? And there's a quote here I think that really illustrates that as well. And it says, "But experience shows that in spite of our infinite care in choosing our successors, the mediocre emperors will always outnumber the wise, and that at least one fool will reign per century. In time of crisis, these bureaus, if well organized, will go on with what must be done, filling the interim, sometimes very long, between two good rulers." So he's saying here that, there's bad leadership, bad rulers, bad politicians, still true for us today. They are inevitable. But if there are strong systems, if there's strong bureaucracies in place that can sort of tide the culture, tide the civilization over until the next good ruler, then everything will be okay. I thought that was pretty cool. He says here, "Life is atrocious, we know. But precisely because I expect little of the human condition, man's periods of felicity, his partial progress, his efforts to begin over again and to continue, all seem to me like so many prodigies which nearly compensate for the monstrous mass of ills and defeats, of indifference and error. Catastrophe and ruin will come, disorder will triumph, but order will too, from time to time. Peace will again establish itself between two periods of war. The words humanity, liberty, and justice will here and there regain the meaning which we have tried to give them. Not all our books will perish, not all our statues, if broken, lie unrepaired. Other domes and other pediments will rise from our domes and pediments. Some few men will think and work and feel as we have done, and I venture to count upon such continuators placed irregularly throughout the centuries, and upon this kind of intermittent immortality." I love that. He's saying that things are going to change. Like what we think is permanent today will be replaced by other things. But his hope is that there's going to be a few that will continue sort of the course of civilization, and humanity, liberty, and justice will continue on. If not sporadically, because there will be also periods of disorder. Finally, just to close with a quote, as he's reflecting on his life, and his life is coming to an end, he has a little, I thought, really kind of moving little paragraph here to his soul. And he says, "Little soul, gentle and drifting, guest and companion of my body, now you will dwell below in pallid places, stark and bare. There you will abandon your play of yore. But one moment still, let us gaze together on these familiar shores, on these objects which doubtless we shall not see again. Let us try, if we can, to enter into death with open eyes." Isn't that beautiful? I thought that was so cool. This book was really, really, really cool to read. It was part meditation, part history, part biography. All of it sort of really well written and really engaging. And I just enjoyed this so much. So, Memoirs of Hadrian. I will end the chat there. I do have some more historical fiction planned for this year, but my next chat is actually going to be Under Capitalism, If Your Head Aches, They Just Yank Off Your Head, a collection of poetry by Ariel Francisco. I will have a chat on this coming up very soon. Until next time, take care.